We talk a lot on this program about what's going on overall in the country. Sometimes those problems get very human, and our next guests are going to talk to us a little bit about that. You know, America's facing a rural healthcare crisis. 283 hospitals in rural areas are facing the very real possibility of closure, and that has brought together our next two guests who are marching 283 miles from, as I understand it, from Belhaven, North Carolina to Washington, D.C. Together, we will have the two leaders of this march. In 1 second, Adam O'Neill is the Republican mayor of Belhaven, and Bob Zellner is a legend in the civil rights movement going back to the very early days of the early 1960s and has been an activist ever since. So, Adam, Bob, welcome, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks very much.
Now, listen, first of all, I want to ask you guys, you are in the midst right now, you're obviously paused to take a phone call, but you're walking, as I understand it right now, to Washington, D.C. from North Carolina. Where are you at this moment?
We are about 25 miles south of Fredericksburg, Virginia, and we're moving north today. It's about 94 degrees. It's pretty hot. Bob and I are lucky. We just got to jump in the car to do this interview, and the rest of our walkers are still walking. We've got walkers from about 14 states that have participated in the walk. We're going to have almost 40 states participate either in the walk or in the rally. So we truly have a nationwide event here where people have come to Belhaven, North Carolina, ground zero for rural hospital closings, and are walking to Washington, D.C. to protest these rural hospital closings.
Now, let me start with you, Mayor O'Neill. You folks have been saying that your town is ground zero, and that's because, well, for one thing, you were the first town to get a hospital under the Hill-Burton Act of 1947, which established community rural hospitals. And if I have my facts right, it was also the first of those hospitals to be closed under these new conditions.
Yes, it's been a tough situation. In North Carolina, the expansion of Medicaid has been held up and not followed through with, and it's caused pressure on rural hospitals. But in our campaign of awareness that we're conducting with this walk, we're not pointing fingers. We're simply saying we've got a horrific tragedy about to take place in our country where 283 hospitals could close. And we're working on getting our hospital open back up in Belhaven, North Carolina. But I spoke at a policy forum in D.C. this past February, and I learned there were 283 hospitals looking at closing. Well, I know what that looks like. And when a hospital closes, it devastates your economy, and it devastates folks in the ways of needless deaths. We've had several people die from lack of an emergency room. So that's why, and that's policy forum, I said if some people would walk to D.C. with me, I would do another walk to protest these closings, so that's what we're doing.
Well, now, you mentioned the deaths, the tragic deaths, and it's something people don't understand. We've had other guests on the show just talk about how health policy is, in fact, in real life and death matter. Now, Bob Zellner, you've been involved in activism, mostly civil rights activism, going all the way back to the 50s, I guess, actually. Now, how do you see this, just from a historical point of view, how do you see this fight for rural hospitals in this kind of long arc of the civil rights, the struggle for justice there?
Well, it's a new civil rights issue, rural hospitals, because one of the reasons they're closing the rural hospitals is that there's a lot of poor people that live there, a lot of black people live in eastern North Carolina. The hospital in Belhaven served Beaufort County, and Hyde County didn't even have a doctor, have no doctor's office, no nothing in the whole county of Hyde. It's the largest, and it's the most remote and the poorest county in North Carolina. So when they closed the hospital, they condemned a lot of those people, workers, fishermen, farmers, woodcutters. They condemned them to death, and that's a civil rights issue. And we're bringing people together across political lines, class lines, race lines. There's a whole new movement starting in North Carolina, and this is a great victory for this movement.
Now, I'm hearing about this. I'm hearing that there are interesting things happening in North Carolina, and I also across party lines, from what I understand. We've spoken with Reverend William Barber and others down there, and this is really, Mayor O'Neill, this is not really in one sense at least, it's not a party issue, is it?
When rural hospitals close, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, everybody dies from lack of an emergency room if you need one. It's not a black white problem. It's not Hispanic, Asian. It is an American problem. And I think there are issues that come along like this every so often, where truly everyone can work together to try and fix this tragedy that's about to take place. If you just have 10 needless deaths at each one of these 283 hospitals, you have the equivalent of a 9/11 taking place every year, year after year. Like Portia Gibbs, let's talk about her for just a quick second. Portia Gibbs had a heart attack. Her husband took her to the paramedics facility in Swanquarter, North Carolina. Then, because Belhaven's hospital was closed, no emergency room, they drove to a high school parking lot, and that rescue squad sat in that parking lot for an hour waiting for a helicopter. About the time the helicopter landed, she passed away. Well, 45 minutes into that hour, she was still talking to the rescue personnel inside the van. So she would have been at the hands of an emergency room doctor in about 25 minutes. If our emergency room hadn't been open, she probably would have lived. Another example is a Methodist preacher in Belhaven died right before the hospital closed, almost. He coded on the ambulance. He lived like 3 blocks from the hospital. He's coded on the ambulance. They spent 30 minutes with him in an ice tub, doing everything they could trying to revive him. They did revive him, and he's preaching at the Methodist Church in Belhaven every Sunday still today. And then you have, so that's how important these hospitals are. Another thing, we've had walkers with us from Shelby County, Texas. They had a situation where an 18-month-old baby, her dad gave her a grape. She choked on the grape. So they picked her up. The dad and the grandfather rushed her to the hospital, only to find the hospital was closed. They then called 911, and both ambulances were out on calls. That's happening in Belhaven, too. So then they took her to a CVS pharmacy. They didn't know what to do. The little girl's choking to death. So the fire department comes out, and then they try to save the baby. They all stand around and watch that baby die.
Right.
Now, with an emergency room, that baby will still be living, an 18-month-old baby. Now, is that okay? Is it okay to let 283 hospitals die and have incidents like that all over the country? Does it make sense for us to not have health care in rural America for veterans who've been overseas fighting for our liberties, for farmers who feed us? Do you know that our country is going to give away $27.2 billion this year to other countries that don't even like us while we close our own hospitals? We got a priority problem, and I'm hoping that the good people that are in government are going to step forward and do something to stop this tragedy.
Well, I want to get back to that issue in a second, Mayor O'Neill, because I think it's a very, very important one. Now, Bob Zellner, one of the issues that, or I would say one of the factors in the civil rights movement that made it so transformative was that it spoke to the moral conscience of a nation. And one of the ways, it seems to me that you were there, but it seems to me that it spoke to the conscience of a nation because it was on the television and because people actually got to see the injustice playing out in real time in front of them. How this strikes me as another issue that might speak to the moral conscience of a nation, but how does that get communicated in this day and age?
Well, in the civil rights movement, the actions of the young people and Dr. King and Rosa Parks and so forth, and people marching, it caught the imagination. It captured the imagination of the American people. And that's what's happened in this case. When we started out from Belhaven, we could barely get any attention. The closer we get to Washington, the more attention people are paying. And on the West Coast, they're paying more attention than on the East Coast for some reason. But now we have a huge breakthrough that we'll be announcing on Monday about legislation coming up. And it's going to be a huge national story. And the people who are coming up with this legislation are pointing directly to Belhaven and the march last year, and especially the march this year for 283 hospitals. They've been forced to do something about it because little people walking along the road and a mayor of a small town in North Carolina and Reverend Barber in the Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina, it's captured the imagination of the people, and eventually the news media will catch on to it. So you're you're way ahead of the curve here. Thank you.
Well, listen, and I hope, maybe you'll come back on and tell us about that when it happens. I don't want you to spill your own secret now about what that legislation is. You can if you want to, but let me ask you, I guess, either one of you, but maybe Bob, since you brought it up, is this national legislation? Can you say that, or is it North Carolina legislation?
I better let Adam talk to. He's a politician. I'm the civil rights activist. So
all right,
Adam. Some background on it anyway.
Yeah, are we talking about national legislation? Are you at liberty to say?
Yes, we are. We're talking about some good people paying attention to this issue and trying to figure out a solution. And hopefully Monday we're going to be able to let the world know that there are good people in Washington, D.C. that want to fix this problem, that don't think it's okay to close 283 hospitals, and they're going to try to do something about it. And that's what's important. Is our whole campaign is about awareness. Our goal when we set out the first step from Belhaven, North Carolina, was to let the American people know that there were 283 hospitals about to close. Because people don't know. I was in a government building in Virginia yesterday, meeting with the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. And the security guard, I told him about the 283 hospitals. He had the biggest look of shock on his face. He doesn't know. The American people don't know that there are 283 hospitals about to close. That is horrific. And that's what we're trying to do, is get that word out. And hopefully we're going to have a situation where Monday we're going to have something to announce that will bless the country.
All right, so let's. Well, I know a lot of people don't know about this, and they don't know about the human cost. They don't know about the deaths of the husbands and wives and infants and so on. But hopefully, our listeners do now. So why don't we close with this? And maybe since Adam is the politician and Bob, you're the activist, if we've got people listening who would like to help out from a kind of citizen and activist point of view, is there some place they can go to learn more about it, or is there some way they can help support this movement?
We have a website, thewalknc2dc.com. That's THEWALKNCTODC.com. So you can go on there and learn something about the walk. We have you have the ability there to donate to the walk. And I would like to ask everyone who hears this to make a call to their congressman and let them know that you're aware that there's 283 hospitals looking at closure, and you think that your congressman needs to get involved in it, because literally it means your family. This is not just rural people. Urban people are affected by this too. Last year, the last part of our walk, a man rode up to me on a bicycle. He said, "Are you the mayor?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I want to shake your hand." He said, "Last year, my dad and I were vacationing in Ocracoke, and we came through Belhaven on the way back home. And my dad had a heart attack in Belhaven, and your hospital saved my dad's life."
Yep.
You see, his dad wouldn't be here today. Well, he lives in Washington, D.C. So these rural hospitals are important to all of us. And once again, we got to remember 30-40% of our veterans live out in rural America. We should not be sliding back in health care in this country, especially when we're giving away $27 billion a year to people who don't even like us.
So, all right, let's encourage people to go to that website. Then that is, if I got it right, The Walk NC2DC, right? And
yep.
And maybe you guys will come back and let us know how this effort is going. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, Mayor Adam O'Neill of Belhaven, North Carolina, and civil rights activist Bob Zellner. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.